So, as mentioned, I'm Craig G. Anderson, joined with two students that work closely with me, Nasim Eshgarf and Zack Carpenter. But who even are we? So I'm an assistant professor in games at the University of Utah. Yes, I still can't believe they let me do this. Nasim is a PhD student in educational psychology in the University of Minnesota, and Zack is a PhD candidate in EdPsych at the University of Minnesota. But what even is this really do? So as Joe mentioned, last year, Professor David Valina and I presented some work where we were showing off how we have been using puzzle games, Baba Is You in particular, to investigate how players solve problems. So we looked at things like, when are they noticing deviations from their plans, from the way they think about the mechanics? When are they revising those actions? And when are they giving sort of causal explanations? They're saying out loud, oh, it's because of this. This is why I'm hitting this problem. We looked a lot at how to give effective hints while people are playing puzzle games in a way that is not giving up the answer, still lets the player maintain a lot of the autonomy and hold on to that very important aha moment of solving the puzzle themselves, but making sure that they don't get hard stuck, that they get onto a path where they can explore more. For that, we looked at things like, what are their distal goals, the overall goal of the level? What are their proximal goals? How are they trying to accomplish it? What are their goal strategies? Like, what is the actual series of events they're taking to do these things? And then their understanding of what the mechanics of the game even do. What even is this research that we're working on now? So we are working in Baba Is You then and now again. Our view is kind enough to work closely with us, especially in the beginning of this research, and let us have a version of Baba Is You that actually tracks what the player is doing, their log data basically. So we have millions of lines of people playing Baba Is You, and we get to look through it and look for patterns and see how people are approaching solving problems. So really, that was that first study. We were looking at how do people solve problems in puzzle games, Baba Is You in particular. Our current research is taking a slightly different approach. So we found out all these wonderful things about how people solve problems in puzzle games, and now we wanted to turn around and talk to the puzzle game developers. We wanted to figure out, how do puzzle game developers create these spaces where people are making or solving problems in these wonderful playful spaces. So a quick overview of what we're going to talk about before I hand it off to the talented students working on this project. We basically are taking two different approaches. So we're going to call them track 1 and track 2. In track 1, and Nasim will get into this in much more detail soon, we basically use the level editor of Baba Is You to create 3 alternative versions of the first 7 levels. So when the player is just learning what even is Baba Is You, what are the basic concepts that we're trying to learn to prepare to go on to the next part of the game. And basically we use all that data that we pull, video data of them playing, we get them to talk out loud, and the log data that we pull out, and we start to look at group comparisons. Are there differences between the players who go through these 3 different ways to learn how to play? The second track, which Zack will get into in more detail, is looking a lot more at when we sat down with 20 puzzle game developers, many who are here at ThinkyCon giving talks. We just asked them questions about, how do you design these things? And sat down with them with a specific game that they developed and walked through the design choices that they made in each of those parts. So I will pass it off to Nasim, who is going to lead us through our first track. And stop sharing.
Thank you, Craig. Hey everyone, I'm going to talk about the onboarding track. And let me start with a question. What's the best way to teach game mechanics? Do we tell them exactly what to do, show them the path, or let them figure it out through failure? We tested all three approaches. Let me show you exactly what we did. This is the same level called Out of Reach, designed three different ways plus the original version. In Boba is you rules are physical objects. You can make rock is push to make rock pushable, or change flag is win to rock is win when the flag is unreachable. In the original version, as you can see, we didn't have any modification. This is what player normally experience, and this is our baseline. And this is the tutorialized version. Basically, maximum hand holding. Pop-up text say, push this block here. Arrow point to important object, and summary screen after each level show you a summary of what you learn. It's like having a teacher over your shoulder. And safe problem solving. We redesign level to be fail-proof. Block off wrong path, remove objects that cause dead ends, and made solution visually obvious, like bowling with bumpers. Like it's like you will success no matter what. And the increase in pass, we made failure more likely. Basically, extra walls to bump into, easy way to get stuck, and obvious solution that don't work based on productive failure. Struggle first, learn deeper. We recruit 122 players for 3-session study over 10 days. Let me walk you through the structure. For the first session, each player played their assigned versions of the introductory levels: original, tutorialized, safe problem solving, or increasing pass. This is where they experience the different onboarding approaches. And right after that, they took our 12-question quiz and complete surveys about their experiences. And 3 days after that, the second sessions, in this session now, everyone played the same new levels. No more modifications. We are looking for carryover effects from their different onboarding experiences. And a week after that, for the third session, again, everyone plays on identical new levels, then complete final surveys about difficulty, enjoyment, and curiosity. This design let us see both immediate effects, how they perform during different onboarding, and lasting effects, whether those differences persist when everyone faced the same challenges. We collect multiple types of data to understand how players learn. The behavioral log data capture every action when players create or break rules, use undos, or restart levels, start, quit levels, or even complete it. We gave everyone a 12-question quiz after the first session, which was our onboarding session, to test if they understood the mechanics. We also surveyed them about their experience, how engaged they were, how difficult they found it, and their curiosity and enjoyment. And we record Think Aloud session to hear their problem-solving process in real time. We wanted to understand 3 things. Did players actually learn the game mechanics? How did they problem solve differently? And what was their experience? Here's our most surprising findings. The safe problem solving groups, where we remove all frustration points, scored significantly lower on the quiz than every other groups. They had the smoothest experience, but the poorest understanding of the game mechanics. Looking at the problem-solving behavior during the first session, which was the onboarding session, we see clear differences. The safe problem-solving group had the lowest undo rate compared to increase impasse. This shows safe problem-solving players weren't struggling or experimenting as much. And rule manipulation rates were more similar across groups, suggesting all players were engaging with the core mechanics, just with different level of trial and error. And players accurately perceive the difficulty differences. Increase impasse groups rate their experience as most difficult and safe problem solving as easiest. They felt the difference we designed. Let's step back and look at the full picture. This table shows how each approach performed across all our measures. Safe problem solving had the lowest difficulty, but also poorest learning, and the only group with decreased curiosity. Increased impasse had the highest difficulty, but maintained both good learning and stable enjoyment. The tutorial group learned well, but still saw enjoyment drop. This suggests that productive struggle the increase impasse approach might be sweet spot for both learning and engagement. I'm going to pass it to Zack to talk about the second track.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. And okay, now we come to track 2 of our research project, which is all about some interviews with puzzle game developers. And as Craig kind of mentioned initially, we really wanted to build off our prior work in trying to deeply understand how developers are going about designing puzzle games. We have some understanding from our prior work about how players are problem solving and learning in Baba Is You, but we don't have a deep understanding of how these spaces are being designed. So we went into this project asking ourselves a bunch of questions. How do devs think about onboarding new players to their games? How do they think about failure, difficulty, and challenges in their games? How do they design for it? Overall, we really wanted to understand what is kind of the overall design process. How do they pull off the feat of designing these magical spaces for players? And how even can we bring these perspectives together to inform game and even broader learning design? So we took these broader questions with us as we began the study by reaching out to puzzle game developers that we connected with at the last ThinkyCon. And we worked with these devs to schedule 2-hour interview. The first hour really focused in on asking devs about their design philosophy, how they onboard players, how they design for challenge, and other questions that get at their overall design process. And then the second hour, as also Craig also alluded to earlier, really focused on walking through a game that they created and asking questions about why they made certain design decisions. For example, an overall question that was asked here was, talk me through the design of these early levels. And of course, some other questions that asked about specific moments in their games and why they decided to design a thing a certain way. So in all, we interviewed 20 game developers, and we have the automatically generated Zoom transcripts, the video data, of course, from these Zoom meetings, and this kind of represents our data for the study. So we're still in the process of analyzing track 2, but so far this kind of analysis process has fallen into 2 larger buckets. The first bucket is really more of a deductive approach. In other words, it's kind of top down. This means that we're kind of starting with some kind of theory, hypothesis, or framework, and we let this theory or hypothesis or framework guide the analysis that we're doing. In our case, we explicitly wanted to build off of a researcher named G and his research work, where he laid out some design principles that games embody and what makes them so good for learning. And then the second bucket is more of an inductive approach. And this means more bottom up. We start with the data and we really try and let the data speak for itself and generate themes by staying grounded in the data. So let's focus first on this top deductive approach, starting with an overview of G's principles. I won't get into the nitty-gritty for the sake of time, but broadly, G's goal in putting forward these principles was really to get education researchers and educators in general to think more deeply about how games are designed and what they're doing to capture players and teach them the underlying rules of often an entirely new system that they never encountered before so quickly and effectively. So G came up with a set of 13 principles, and he grouped them under the kind of these three broader categories, which he called empowered learners, problem solving, and understanding. And under each one of these broader categories, we have certain principles like customize and co-design under empowered learners, pleasantly frustrating, and sandboxes under problem solving, and system thinking and meaning as action image under understanding. And all of these are described as something that games are doing that fuel learning and what makes games, as G calls them, learning machines. So with this kind of framework in the forefront of our minds, we began to look at the data in a multi-step process. So step one being we have 4 researchers on the team at this time, and we divided up the interviews amongst all the researchers. So about 5 interviews each and about 10 hours of video data. And then after that, going to step 2, we started looking at the data through the lens of G's principles. So what that looked like is I have, for example, 4 quotes here. Let's say researcher 1 came across this top quote while listening to interview 13. This researcher would go through G's principles and make an argument for categorizing it within a certain principle. So for example, maybe this researcher decides the first quote here should go under fish tank, because it seems like when the Gev is talking about the player only seeing one penguin at a time, an example very specific to their game, they're really talking about stripping down the mechanics for that player, which is what a fish tank is all about. Then this process would kind of continue, and maybe researcher 2 notices that this quote is a sandbox. They're talking about a sandbox principle because the dev is talking about creating spaces where the player cannot fail for a tutorial. And then again, maybe this one is just in time and on demand because it talks about hints and giving the player the right amount of information and helping them. And then finally, maybe this last one is cycles of expertise because it talks about new challenges that give the player an opportunity to discover new things about a mechanic they did not know before. So each researcher went through this process for their interviews of categorizing quotes, and we ended up with a spreadsheet filled with quotes for each of the 13 principles. And then we engaged in a kind of final step to kind of derive some themes from what we were seeing in the data. So step 3 involved one researcher looking at all the quotes under a certain principle, let's say sandboxes. This researcher would come up with themes that they thought best captured the data, and then they would pull in the supporting quotes for that theme. And then all 4 researchers would meet together to talk about the themes that the other researcher had came up with individually. And then after this, we would go through this pretty long and intense process of arguing for what we were seeing in the data. And then eventually out of that came themes for each of these broader 13 design principles. And how many themes exactly? 110 different themes. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of richness and a lot of creativity that these devs are talking about. Of course, I'm not going to go into all 110 themes, but just to briefly give you an idea of what it looks like and what we found, I wanted to present an example. So the overall principle of pleasantly frustrating, we had themes such as prioritizing interesting over difficult, encouraging deep thinking, considering difficulty across all the levels, even including optional levels, and then finally getting stuck but not hard stuck, which Craig also mentioned earlier. And diving into this theme a little bit more, we can see that these are all the quotes from the developers that we ended up arguing that support this theme. And so we can see that even more specifically, Dev 18 talks about good challenge and bad challenge, good thinking and bad thinking, and good stuck and bad stuck. And this dev really emphasizes players not spending too much time on a particular thing, being a marker of stuck but not hard stuck. And then Dev 13 is also echoes the idea in saying that they do not want players to be stuck for too long. And then Dev 6 kind of continues to emphasize the temporary nature of the word stuck, kind of overall showing that developers are trying to ensure that the challenges of their puzzles are not so high that they feel impossible. That is, they want their players to get stuck, but not hard stuck. Then, so we're currently working on writing up this paper that discusses this work, and overall this deductive process resulted in a wide range of themes for each principle, and we view this as really awesome because it provides an empirical validation of G's principles. Like, this is something that game designers are really talking about, and it also provides a lot of nuance and extends G's principles in new ways, and hopefully can serve as a launching pad for design work in games and even broader education. So with that kind of checked off, we're going to talk a little bit more about the inductive approach that we took in another kind of analysis. So in this approach, we started with 3 researchers. For this particular analysis, we were interested in how designers are thinking about difficulty and designing challenge. So we focused on questions related to this, like how do you conceptualize failure in your puzzles, and how do you design failure or design puzzles to be the right level of challenge. Then each individual researcher kind of went through all the 20 interviews with these questions in mind, and tried to gather the responses to these questions and categorize them into themes individually. And then one researcher kind of brought all these themes that these researchers had kind of noticed in the data into converging themes that we are going to present soon. And then this resulted in an unknown number of themes because we're still kind of doing this analysis, but also wanted to share some highlights here. So in response to the question about designing the right level of challenge, many designers talked about how their goal is to design challenge in a way where it creates that moment of insight where the solution clicks into place after some level of effort. And that is what some people call the aha moment. For example, Dev 2 talks about how good difficulty is where players have an aha moment even every 15 minutes. And Dev 9 continues by talking about how making puzzles too easy will actually deprive players from arriving at that aha moment. Then another theme when it comes to Dev's perspectives on failure is that true failure is when players disengage from the game entirely. And many devs bring this away from the player and think about how they can have designed the game differently. As Dev 4 talks about, but in this case I failed. It was not the player who failed. Then both Dev 1 and 12 talk about how failure is stopping playing the game and not coming back. I think this is a super interesting perspective because it's different from how we typically talk about failure in research, in a way that failure in research is mostly centered on the person doing the task, not who's designing the task. So I really love this kind of perspective. And then, so this is the more inductive approach that we took, and we think that these themes will hopefully give us a good idea of how devs are thinking about designing challenge in their games, which is a central issue for engagement and learning, right? If you design something that's too hard, people won't want to play it because they're not making any progress. But then if you design something too easy, people get bored and also don't want to play or engage in that thing. So this is how we've been looking at the interviews so far. But of course, there's still a lot of things to think about and work through and kind of consolidate when going through the richness of these interviews. Some of the things that we've been thinking about, for example, is how might these themes influence actual design, whether that be game design or the design of classroom or other learning environments. We also have developers, as we've mentioned, talking about specific games and their games. So we could look at these discussions more closely to see how folks' design philosophy actually manifests in practice. There's also the matter of this being a particular context, right? A specific puzzle game, Bob Is You. So one thing to think about is what new insights might be possible if we study different types of games in a similar way. So I think overall, there's a lot of exciting insights from this work with game developers, and it was a real privilege I never interviewed them personally, but I watched a lot of their video to kind of learn from them in that kind of way, and lots of exciting places to go in the near future. And so with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Craig.
Okay, sorry, I just need to pull up the slides again. There we go. I think that should be correct. Okay, I'm assuming everything is working well, so I'm just going to jump in. So we're going to end earlier than we anticipated, but that leaves lots of time for questions, which is why I stopped answering them in the chat, even though I wanted to. But we can have some great conversations about what this research even means. Like, why do we even do this kind of research? So to summarize the findings that we went over, so in that first track, when we're comparing these different onboarding approaches, it was really surprising to us too, that the tutorialized version, where you're just telling the player, here's how you get through the level, here's what these mechanics do, was as high on the quiz as the original game and the increase in pass group. We figured there'd be more of a split in how people were learning. We weren't surprised that the safe problem solving group was scoring lower, largely because we thought that we were taking away a lot of the thinking that they need to do. Even though we're showing them how the puzzle works, or the mechanic works, and how to solve the puzzle visually, or very visually intuitively, which matches that kind of tutorial where we're telling them in text how it works. It seems that even just reading through the text and then completing the puzzle yourself in the way that it's instructing actually does help a lot. It actually helps them figure these things out. Mind you, then we see differences in how they rate the difficulty and engagement and enjoyment. And a note that I'll put on sort of the conversation that's been happening around our finding on how, you know, the enjoyment sort of dropped for all the groups except for the increased impasse group. It's more of a leveling out effect. The increased impasse group actually rated the first part of the study the least enjoyable. It was still enjoyable, but lower than everybody else. And basically, when everyone got to the next area, the lake, if you're familiar with Baba's U, that's when players all rated the level of enjoyment the same. So we see, and the difficulty of those later levels the same. And those ones were unmodified. So we basically see that a drop in their enjoyment that matches the drop in how they're rating the difficulty. So starting the levels off very easy, we saw some players saying they enjoyed it a bit more, even though the safe problem solving group showed signs that they didn't understand the mechanics as well. And then as the game progresses and gets more difficult, unsurprisingly, we see a drop in that enjoyment and in how much they're enjoying the game. Which I don't think that's surprising either. Sometimes when the game gets harder, players might, you know, have less fun doing it, especially if they had a lesser understanding of how the mechanics work in the first place. So I also want to point out that we expected to find a lot more differences in just our straight comparisons between these groups, finding differences in how they navigate the game after they leave their modified sections. But we didn't. We found that they're all pretty similar when they get into the next area. There are some sort of indications that there are sort of differences sort of embedded that are hidden in there. But there are other factors, we think, that are masking that. So what we are planning to do, what we're already doing next and publishing at, which one is it? Digra, yeah, hopefully pretty soon. Is looking at these differences, but through the lens of game experience. So, how much they play video games. So we, as part of our survey, we gave them a question and asked how many hours on average per week do you play video games, and how many years have you been doing this? And we use that as a rough gauge, not a tally of the number of hours, but a rough gauge of how experienced are players in video games broadly, not necessarily just puzzle games. And we find that has a really big impact on how they are answering these questions of how hard it was, how enjoyable it was it, and to the point where if they have high game experience, they might go up If they have sort of the mid of the pack, they stay flat. And if they have less game experience, they go down in some of these variables. It is a very stark difference to see them lay out like that. So we're really excited to lay in more factors into how we're looking at all of this data to see what are the things besides the way they learned how to play the game, the early mechanics, what else is influencing their answers and how they go about playing the game. As for our second track, we are really just starting to dig into these interviews. I know lots of them are at ThinkyCon right now listening. I can't thank y'all enough for sitting down for those interviews. It was so much fun just to chat with y'all, and it's been really informative, and we're going to be going through those answers for a long time. So as Zach was saying, our first approach was to look at these answers through the lens of sort of game-based learning principles, and we were really struck at how similar game developers talk about creating their games in ways that learning scientists talk about how players learn to play through early parts of the game, or the entire game, really. But we were also very surprised to see, when we're talking specifically to puzzle game designers, it also changes the perspective a lot. That as puzzle game designers, you have a different way of thinking about how players should be learning the mechanics of the game and how to progress. As Zach was going over a little bit, we learned a lot about how there's a tension between teaching the player how to solve puzzles and making sure that you're still obscuring the solution to those puzzles, having just enough information for them that they can figure it out themselves. Where my hunch is that a lot of other genres don't do that. They just want you to know how to play so you can go have fun playing whatever genre of game it is. In puzzle games, it is much less attractive. It's much less valued to have the players simply know the solutions right from the start. You want them to get in the habit of figuring it out for themselves. And that is a very different approach than a lot of game developers who focus more on other genres take to their games. And that's just a really fascinating thing to us. Likewise, challenge and failure, because of that different approach, also just becomes different. It's very different from how we think about failure in particular. We won't get too far into the findings. We're getting ready to write them up. Well, partially writing them up already for a different conference to present. And one of the biggest stark differences that came to my mind was how the focus for what we think of failure in puzzle games is nowhere near touching when you do something wrong, right? Even in Bob as you, if you walk into an object, the water in the level we shut off, that sink, and you disappear. An observer might call that failure. They might say, "Oh, you failed. You messed up." Both players and developers don't think of that as failure at all. And particularly for the puzzle game community, it is nowhere near. That is what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to figure out how the mechanics work, and most often through tinkering, through playing around with it, so that you understand how the mechanics work, the systems underlying it, and you can build an understanding to progress further and further. Which is just something I wanted to land on for when we're doing these interviews with y'all. It really struck me how in line puzzle game developers are with learning science principles and thinking about failure in these positive sort of ways, failure, quote unquote, that it really struck me too. And it's not surprising when I sat down and started to really think about it, because that is what puzzle games are. Puzzle games are a fun way to learn a cool mechanic and the system that developers build around it to teach the player what it does. And I just absolutely love that about puzzle games and y'all in the puzzle game development world. And we think that this research is important for us to present to our other game scholar nerds, right? Like, we of course love to, like, in academia, talk back and forth to each other about the cool stuff that we're researching, but I'm super excited to be more ingrained in the Thinky game community, because it's important, I think, for us to share these understandings with y'all, with puzzle game developers, to try to help get your insights, really, so we can understand better, and also to make sure that the community is understanding what we're learning too, which hopefully helps make better games, helps give better perspectives on what's important in puzzle games and why most you all take the approach that you do. Just understanding that, I think, is really helpful. And in the first track, we saw that how players learn the mechanics of your game is actually really important, and also isn't. I want to really underline that while we did see that drop in the quiz for the safe problem-solving group, when we looked at the data afterwards, it washes out pretty quick. And to me, the biggest difference between the 4 different approaches, including RV's original approach, which is also very hard, like, to start. Bob as you is hard until you get it, right? But you can say that about every puzzle game, I guess. But to me, the big difference between those 4 versions is just how you want the game to feel. Do you want your player to feel like that they can get through the early parts quickly, grab onto the mechanics, and then start ramping up the difficulty? Do you want them to start the game feeling like, oh, I'm going to need to put an effort, I'm going to need to think really hard about these mechanics? And it kind of sets the tone, right? So the different approaches, I think, I wouldn't just, basically what I'm saying, I wouldn't discard the C problem-solving approach. It still can have its utility in a game if that's the kind of feel that you want your players to have. If you want them to not to have to work too hard. And on the other side of that coin, it's also important to know that they can come out the other end of that with a lower understanding of what the mechanics do. But maybe you can use that to your advantage. We also talked a lot about how developers think about development, and this is what I was saying before, is like it's very in line with these game-based learning principles, and the more that in the community we can share this kind of research and understandings, I think the better game developers, like most of you, will be able to utilize them and to lean into them and have fun playing around with them. And also not, like, there are also ways that I think that games, puzzle games in particular, break some of those rules and break some of the things that we as games researchers, especially in game-based learning environments, like, think about why they're put together the way that they're put together. So it is all food for thought more than anything else, right? I really want to emphasize that we're not coming into the Thinky Games community and telling you what the best way to do this is. We're trying to come into the Thinky Games community and learn from you, and to distill all of that into what we think is important and hopefully is useful. for the community. Another reason why we do this research, and this is a bit of a shameless plug, but we're doing more of this. We're doing, and why we're tapping the communities, we're doing more research at this conference. If you haven't already seen the posts about it, during the game jam at the end of the conference, we're collecting data from that, because we really want to see how talks like this, talks like the ones that you're going to be listening to and watching throughout the rest of the conference, how does that influence the way that you approach making your games? So just quickly let you know, if you're interested in doing that, you sign up when you're handing in your game. You do not need to sign up for the study to participate in the game jam at all. You really just let us look at your game, any game design docs that you put together or that you have created through that, and then we ask you to complete a short 2-question survey, and as a thank you, we'll send you a $40 USD gift card voucher per group submission. We can't give $40 for the 10 people in your group if you have that many, but that would just be break our bank. But if you want or if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Discord, or you can chat about it in the Game Jam chat thread. Well, thank you all very much, and we would love to answer any of your questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to all three of you. And thanks for reminding everybody about the jam as well. If people haven't seen that, they can head to the ThinkyCon page on the Thinky Games website, and there's a link through to the jam from there where they can find more information. And as you said, they can find you on Discord as well and just message you. You'll be around for sure. So did a bunch of questions did also come through, so we'll try and get to those as many as we can. So the first question I picked up was from Safrona. Do you think players were less likely to quit or give a negative opinion because it was a study? Like, is it possible the enjoyment change results may have been different otherwise? I guess that's a big question that always plagues researchers, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Joe. Like that's something we think about a lot as games researchers, because it's hard to tackle it. And it's a good point. We do try to mitigate that as well as we can by letting participants know they can quit at any time they want. In our study in particular, except for the first 7 levels, they could skip levels all they wanted. They have free will to play whatever they wanted or however they wanted. But we do still recognize that simply watching them play has some impact on how they play.
Great, thank you. So the next one wasn't actually a question, but it's a suggestion, maybe for Zach. Next year, I think this came from Sylvia from the Startup team, or somebody from the Startup team, saying we'd love to see all 110 themes. That could be a talk for next time. 110 themes of Thinky game development. You up for that?
Yeah, I originally had like a slide just with it was so tiny text and I was just gonna flash it up there so people could look at it in all its glory, but I decided otherwise.
Probably sensible, but yeah, it could be fun to see what they were all like. That actually connects to a question that I wanted to ask. Sorry, I'll try and get to the other questions as well, which is, so there's your research and there's also some of the other research that you're talking about. If a Thinky developer is interested in that research, I think sometimes that world can seem a bit like you have to go to what are the different research sites where you can start searching for papers and stuff. I would feel like there's a bit of a wall there. What's your recommendation? I don't know who wants to take this, but for trying to get access to some of that research.
Yeah, I'll jump in as the one who ends up leading these projects for our group and trying to tackle that problem is there's actually fewer walls than you might think. We actually on the research side always feel like that there are walls to industry people, and we absolutely love working with devs closely and especially like you heard me gush about, doing all these interviews, we just absolutely love it. And I'll just plug again, I'll be on Discord. I'm not on the Thinky Games Discord just for this conference. I've been on it for a long time now. And if ever you're curious about the game research or what we do or the papers we write, reach out. We love sharing this stuff.
Amazing, thank you. So next question that we got in the chat was from Indiana Jonas, not to be confused with Indiana Jones. I tend to think that a solution shouldn't be hard to put into place once you have thought of the right answer. I think that idea is connected to this idea. Like sometimes people describe puzzles as like having like more work than they have the thinking part of it. So it's like actually doing the answer is harder than the solving of the puzzle in the first place. So then the question is that something you talked about with devs or learned something about? Yeah, so I guess that's related to the interviews with developers.
Yeah, I think we didn't ask that directly, right? It's really hard to anticipate the questions you want to ask. After that you find out afterwards, you're just like, shoot, why didn't we ask about this? But I think the thing I would say about that is what we learn mostly is puzzle game development is about leading players to answers. When I play Dungeons and Dragons and I'm the dungeon master, I have to get out of my head that it's me versus them. It's trying to craft an experience for them, and I think there is a playful little game in game development of making puzzles where you are kind of playfully keeping the answer away from the player just enough that they're curious and they're very excited to find the answer, and then you craft the experience for them to find the answer. And you all do it incredibly well.
Great, thank you. So I think the next question might be good for Nasim because it's related to the different groups and how they respond to different kinds of puzzles that you designed. Basically, the question is: were there people in the tutorial group who ignored the tutorial? So this would be for the more tutorialized implementation of the level, who ignored the tutorial signs and tried to experiment on their own. Was that something that was observed at all?
Of course, there was some player just ignore those, but most of the people, the design was a kind of that you cannot ignore. Even if you just ignore it, you are seeing it. And yeah, but we had some player they ignored, and they were curious, of course, to just test other things. But
and I guess even if there are some players that ignore it, you're still getting data about the group as a whole.
True.
And what happens when they do see that tutorial, even if they're not following it, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Zack and Craig was also just observe some people may ignore.
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say that people, the way we did it, so a lot of times the level would start with the character next to a sign. And as soon as you're adjacent to the sign, the text would pop up. There's also those other signs that tell the player what to do, where they'd have to orient themselves in a specific way for the text to come up. And even in some cases, when they were placed right next to the sign, I'd watch some players who would blatantly ignore the text. There's also other players who get confused by the text. They're like, I don't know what that means. I'm just going to do this other thing that I think is going to work.
Interesting.
And then the transition also is interesting from having the signs to not having the signs, right? In the second and third session, some players I can remember saying what happened to my signs? I missed my signs. So there's that kind of reaction as well. There's a lot of even variation, how they're reacting, how they're interacting with the
I think that's the tricky thing with game design is that you are designing for all the possible ways that different players could respond to what you're doing, and that can be a extremely complicated space. Cool. So next question was from Plush Lola. the question was, are you familiar with the work of Rafe Costa? And if so, what do you think about it?
I'm terrible with names, but yes. It's ringing a bell, but I need to go back and look at it to give you all my opinions.
Okay, well then maybe it's just further reading. Zach or Nasim, either of you, like?
Yeah, it's not ringing a bell for me.
Okay,
I don't know.
well, there we go. We've got something to research afterwards. Great, and then I think that was it actually. So that wraps up the questions that I've seen. Sorry if I missed any questions. Once again, please head over to the Discord and you can ask any further questions there. Also, if you have any questions about the jam, Craig will be there to answer those as well. Yeah, so the Discord is thinkygames.com/Discord if you're not there already. Yeah, thank you, all three of you. Thanks for joining. We're going to go set up for the next talk now. But yeah, another round of applause for the folks who've joined us. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.